delay. The trains, we picked the worst day possible with the rain and wind. But we made it happen, and thank you very much to these two. I'm about to introduce them to you now. This is going to be live streamed. This will be on YouTube. So just a heads up about that, and you can actually watch it after the event. The fire exits, one through where you come from, and one through there. Along the corridors, we're not expecting a fire or a fire drill. So yeah, well, it's lovely to see you all, and it's a real privilege to welcome Jack Hansen and Dr. James Orr, who have both travelled up from London to see. Jack Hansen is currently embarking on his new door tour, visiting universities up and down the country and speaking at Reform UK societies. His appearances have certainly generated attention. At York, his visits attracted around 400 protesters, while at Bangor, the university initially didn't allow him to speak. I should say the students didn't allow him to speak.
Important
clarification. A very clarification. So I won't work on that today. So, very simple thing. Jack represents Generation Z within Reform UK and has played an important role in expanding the party's digital presence. He was responsible for setting up Nigel Farage's TikTok account, which now has a follow number of 1.4 million, something extraordinary. So a reminder that 21st century politics, media presence is not just optional, but absolutely essential as a prerequisite for success of any political party. Alongside this, Jack writes occasionally for the Daily Mail and regularly appears on GB News and other media outlets. We're also delighted to welcome Dr. James Orr. James is an Associate Professor of Philosophy, Religion and Sustainability at the University of Cambridge, as well as Head of Policy for Reform UK, a very important position, and a Senior Advisor to Nigel Farage. Whenever James appears in the media, they often add the line that he's good friends with J.D. Vance. I always find that slightly amusing, as though knowing an American were a rare accomplishment. Beyond politics, James has developed a substantial intellectual platform of his own. He hosts the podcast First Light, where he interviews thinkers, writers, public figures on politics, philosophy, culture, and everything you can think of. He's also involved with the Edmund Burke Foundation, co-runs the Roger Scruton Legacy Foundation, and serves on the advisory council on Toby Young's brilliant Free Speech Union. He's also contributed extensively to Peterson Academy, where he has produced 5 courses totaling around 38 hours of lectures. I can personally say I've benefited enormously from them, ancient philosophy and Plato, from the Ionian school of thought, all the way up to Epicureanism. Fantastic, and I strongly recommend some of it's available on YouTube to watch if you don't have a subscription. So we're very fortunate tonight to have both a leading political thinker and a prominent young political commentator joining us here in the two. James and Jack, thank you very much for coming. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Henry. I appreciate that introduction. So I'm not planning on speaking for long because I think the questions are always a little bit more interesting than anything I've got to say. But I feel like this week is the perfect time to really talk about the political scene and more specifically the British right-wing political scene. So I think most of us in this room are quite clear that we think the country is broken, and many of us I think it's beyond repair. I don't happen to share that view, but the feeling is very dire amongst people in our country, and amongst younger people I think it's incredibly angry. You know, people are incredibly angry about what the political class have done to our country, and that is why you're seeing politics changing so much. And there's one man, actually, who's been responsible for a lot of the change that we've seen in politics in Britain, and that man is Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK. He is probably Britain's most successful politician in terms of pushing his political viewpoint. So if you look at a couple of his electoral successes, in 2015 with UKIP, 3.9 million votes, and he got the Conservative Party to commit to the EU referendum. 2016, that EU referendum, it would not have happened and we would not have won if it wasn't for Nigel Farage and his sort of political movement and vehicle that he created. 2019, you had the Brexit Party, in which the Brexit Party won the European elections and kicked out Theresa May subsequently. And then obviously in 2024, you had the general election when Reform elected 5 MPs. Basically all off the back of Nigel's sort of political personality. So he has a proven track record of electoral success. And at the same time as that success, he has been able to push forward things and issues that previously would have never been able to be discussed. The main one that comes to mind is immigration. You know, I was too young to really remember it, but at the time, his Breaking Point poster, you know, that famous poster of the illegal migrants crossing through Europe, that was a huge pivotal moment in the political discussion of this country. And he really pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable and what politicians were willing to talk about. And so the question that I always ask is, where would the British right be without Nigel Farage? And to me, the British right would be irrelevant. You know, you've just had 14 years of the Conservative Party totally destroying our country. Without Nigel Farage, you would have no alternative vehicle, and that alternative vehicle is Reform. So Nigel in Reform has created what is an electorally, nationally successful party. And it's a right-wing party that's topping the polls. It's now at 30% in the polls. It is set to form the next government. It is set to kill both Labour and the Conservative Party. It's set to smash 100 years, a century of political consensus. And it's doing all of that on a hugely radical political agenda. So now you have Nigel Farage, Zia Youssef, senior party figures out in public telling the public we are committed to mass deportations. Again, think back 2 years ago. You would have never have heard that type of rhetoric and that type of policy. You also have the policy of abolishing indefinite leave to remain, which is essentially taking away the immigration status of millions of people in this country and saying to them, you've got to reapply. And we may or may not give you a visa to stay in our country. You've also got policies such as social housing only for British citizens. So you've got 30% of the electorate now, a winning cohort of the electorate, backing those radical policies. Yet the debate online, amongst the online right, is that Reform isn't radical enough, is that Reform doesn't go far enough, or that some people don't like Nigel Farage personally, or there's too many Tories. Now, whether you think that last one is a valid criticism, you know, I'm sure we can discuss about it, but the call online now is for a new party, even though the party that these people have been dying and crying out for the past decade already exists. Now, this concerns me not electorally, because quite frankly, I think the options on offer will fail and will falter. What it does concern me with is that it's wasting people's energy, and it's specifically wasting the energies of many of the young people in this room and the young people watching at home. So I'd like to speak directly to those younger people, and that's what I'm trying to do on this tour, which is that if you want to have any type of influence and impact the future of this country, if you want to utilize the early years of your life, of your working life, then get on board and join in Reform. It is about creating the next generation of politicians. It's about creating the next generation of civil servants, of political advisors, of policy advisors. I understand the urgency and the radicalism and the frustration that many of our young right-wingers across the country feel. I am one of those radicals. I always have been. But what working for Nigel and working for Reform has really taught me is that patience is the top political personality trait that ensures that you are successful. You've got to take millions of people with you, millions of people across the country with you on an issue. You can't just go on Twitter and say whatever you want and expect to win the next election. That is not how this is going to work. So my message to everyone in this room and my message to people watching is get involved, apply for jobs. We've got James Orr, the head of policy here. He is looking for policy people to influence the next government. Please get involved, please do apply. And I hope this sort of short speech today has convinced many of you to do so. I'm going to hand over to James now. Thank you.
Jack, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to the organisers for having us along. From years and years of bitter experience of organising events like this in my university, I know that they're often very difficult to pull off. So thank you for doing it, and a big thank you to Jack as well. And just want to salute him and his courage for doing this on top of an extremely busy day job. But over in the last few months, I've realised just how busy it is. It's quite remarkable that he's doing this, and I hope he can help to raise up a whole generation of people with that kind of courage and appetite for heterodoxy and challenging received wisdom, and trying in particular to channel into these sort of elite-forming institutions and factories that our universities are, of course, and London is very much, some of the energy and some of the anger and sense of betrayal that the broader populace outside these elite domains feel. And that's something which we feel a great deal within Reform. In many ways, our critics like to say that we are whipping it up. We're whipping up this populist fury. No, we're not. We're responding to it. We're trying to harness it. We're trying to crystallize it into policy. We're trying to draw in experts who can articulate in the language of SW1 and through the legislative mechanisms of the British Constitution some of an attempt to respond to that anger, an attempt to take seriously the repeated expressions of betrayal from so many parts of the country, the so-called the somewheres, in David Goodhart's famous formulation in his 2017 book, The Road to Somewhere. The somewheres are the 60% of our fellow citizens who live within 20 miles of where they lived when they were 14. I mean, ask yourselves, do you know anyone who lives within 20 miles of where they lived when they were 14? I suspect that ratio is probably maybe a little bit better up here, but there's this enormous disconnect between what David calls the somewheres and the anywheres, what you might call, what I've started to call the people who are driven by a sense of the politics of home versus those who are driven and animated by what you might call the politics of the cosmopolis, of a kind of rootless transnationalism, where nations are just reduced really to gates at big international airports, or culinary traditions, or something like that, where really a country is not seen as a home, but more as a zone. The only index for the flourishing of a country is its GDP, or inflation rates, or unemployment. Of course, those things matter. Of course they do. But they're not the only things that matter. And they're often very poor indices of how national well-being and the flourishing of the national family is to be understood. And I think you might say that the former group are driven by a sense that we live in a place, a physical place, an island with a history and a heritage of which we can be very proud. I mean, think of the achievements of Newcastle alone in the 19th century. Extraordinary, right at the very cutting edge of world technology, of the Industrial Revolution, one of the very few powerhouses of the Industrial Revolution. Think of what that did to alleviate world poverty from roughly 98% in 1800 to dipping well below 10% in the last 25 years. Quite extraordinary. So we're a place we're a particular place with a particular history and a heritage, and we may not like bits of it, but it's ours. You might not like it when your uncle drinks too much at Christmas, but he's still your uncle. You've got to put up with him, and it's what Chesterton says. My mother, she's my mother, drunk or sober. And thirdly, a nation is not just a set of syrupy propositions, or even worse, values. We're not a project. We're a people. We're a people. We're a national family. That's the right kind of metaphor. And this is not radical. The word political, the word politics, comes from the very first treaties on politics ever written, midway through the 4th century BC, by the great Aristotle. In the opening lines of the opening paragraph, the first page of his Politics, he says, none of this fancy stuff that Plato's come up with. Let's just start from basics. We are animals. We're much more than animals. We're a very distinct kind of animals. With the kinds of animals that turn up to listen to somebody drone on for half an hour about politics on a Thursday evening. This is very unusual behavior in the animal kingdom. But we are animals, and we're animals that are fitted for community. We're fitted for the polis is the word really for the community, the state, the nation. We're a politica zoa. We're paired beings. We will tend to pair with others and with a view to bringing new life into the world, bringing a household into the world, an oikos. But that alone is not enough. You need to team up with other households for all sorts of short to medium term needs. And that you form a village, a comer in Aristotle's language. But that itself is not enough. You have all sorts of long-term needs, geopolitical needs, defense needs, that justify a further expansion of those concentric circles of political affections and loves and loyalties. And that, for Aristotle, is the polis, a relatively small city-state of anything in the 5th and 4th centuries BC, anything between 20 and 100,000 citizens. But that's it, that's how it works. And it's a very empirical, there's not much ideology there. Aristotle just says this is the kinds of beings that we are. We're wired to love what is our own, first and foremost, and our loves, you might say, radiate outwards, but there's a finite stock of love. You might say that in the home, charity begins at home, it doesn't end at home. But it begins at home. That's where you learn to love. You learn to overcome your selfishness. It's a sort of training ground, if you like, a little mini political training ground, you could say the family is. And then you grow up into a community, and then eventually you feel yourself to be part of a greater collective. In Aristotle's context, the city-state, now it's the nation-state. It doesn't always have to be the nation-state. It could be all sorts of other configurations. But for now, at least since 1648 and 1848, roughly speaking, we might say the nation-state is pretty much the only going model of how one structures the national family. And so this means that the politics of reform, the vision of reform, is not a radical one. Or it is radical only in that original sense of radical. Radix in Latin, of course, meaning root. So it's radical in the sense that it goes right to the root of the first kind of form of political thinking in Aristotle. When Nigel Farage came back into the political fray in June 2024, that phrase came to his mind, somewhat surprisingly to some: family, community, country. That simply is those three concentric circles of Aristotelian attachment: household, village, city-state. I once said to Nigel, how did you ever think in coming up with that slogan you could get away with plagiarizing Aristotle? And he said, who? So as a joke, I think he has heard of Aristotle, but he's not reading Aristotle at night. He reads a lot of books. I think he reads a lot more books than the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition combined, as it happens. But one of his great strengths is that he's not an egghead like me. He's not a philosopher. He's a man of action, and he understands what the British people understand, that the time for talk is over, and the time for action is now, and that the hour is late, and then that we've got to all set our hands to the task in front of us, an enormous task, one of the great existential challenges our nation has faced in its long 1,200-year history. I know that might sound dramatic, it might sound hyperbolic, but the fact is, what we've witnessed in the last 25 years is something that is not obviously or easily reversible. You can recover from economic depressions. You can recover from losing a war. In fact, in the case of the history of Britain, actually it's recovering from winning wars. has been the greater challenge after the Napoleonic Wars, First World War and Second World War. Turns out winning wars isn't always the best thing for one's national prosperity. But we've come back from terrible cliff edges, as it were. But the reason immigration presents such a challenge to us, and has done over the last 25 years, is that it's just not clear how one reverses the effects of mass immigration at the scale and speed that we have seen in the last 25 years, but particularly in the last 5 years. I think 1 in 27 people walking the streets of Britain arrived here in the last 5 years alone. We are seeing quite extraordinary numbers. And it's not because the people who are coming here are bad people, that they necessarily mean ill. That's actually irrelevant. It's simply that in order to maintain a sense of togetherness, a sense of what Roger Scruton calls the first person plural, the we, one needs to have a sense of what it is to be a we, what it is to have a shared heritage, a shared culture, what it is to be a member of the national family. There's got to be something in which we can have pride. British citizenship should confer rights, it should confer privileges. For example, I think for a start, it should permit you the exclusive right to vote in our elections, an exclusive right to participate in exercising the kratos on behalf of the demos, that is, the power on behalf of the people. That's not the case in this country. You can be a citizen of any Commonwealth country, including Mozambique, and you can vote in British elections. It's quite extraordinary and deeply puzzling to many all around the world. It might have been possible to retain that sense of the first person plural if the phenomenon of mass migration had not been coupled with decades of aggressive repudiation, condescension, even hatred of Britain, of Britain's legacy, of Britain's history, of Britain's culture, through doctrines of hyperliberalism, and particularly the doctrine of multiculturalism, doctrines of diversity. The antonym of diversity is unity. Very plausibly, the more diversity you've got, the less unity you've got. That's a little bit crude, but a lot of the social science now bears that out, in particular the social science of the great Robert Putnam, an American liberal, highly respected sociologist. He was so horrified by the results of his findings when he worked on the effects of diversity on social trust and other negative social outcomes that he held back his findings for several years. This is just did not fit with his instincts. Multiculturalism was also the antonym, the opposite of what we needed. What we would have needed is an aggressive assertion of monoculturalism. A single organizing horizon that could have helped to stitch together wildly different moral universes, wildly different groups of people, wildly different demographic silos. And so this, I think, is what we're facing. And this is why actually the politics of left and right does feel, it's not that it's completely irrelevant, it's not that it doesn't somehow explain things to some extent, but as I think I've said before, really the politics of left and right died in 2016. Certainly died all across the West in the 2010s. I think that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing, as it were, the convulsions of the corpse of global liberalism. And it's not just here in Britain, we're seeing it in France with the Rassemblement National, Jordan Bardella almost certainly on track at least to win in April 2027. We're seeing it with Vox in Spain, we're seeing it with Chega in Portugal, we see it, of course, with Fidesz in Hungary. It's Orbán going for his 5th consecutive election victory next month. He may or may not get there. Fico in the Czech Republic, we think of Fico, in Slovakia, Bubic in the Czech Republic, Meloni in Italy, Wilders in the Netherlands, Vlaams, Belang in Belgium. There's almost no country in Europe where this sentiment is not beginning to express itself at the ballot box in terms of real electoral power and force, to very different degrees. And actually each of these movements, so they do tend to get lumped together by The Economist, the House magazine of Western liberalism, or the Financial Times or the Times is just this single undifferentiated phenomenon. That it is what you're hearing, what you're seeing in these results, you're seeing in these polling analyses, is really the expression of a disconnected demos, a demos that has been disconnected from its kratos, from power. And I think this is what we're seeing certainly in Britain. And so it's very difficult to, for commentators in London to understand this phenomenon, because if you go in thinking, is Reform a right-wing party or is it a left-wing party, then you're just going to get very, very confused. If we are a right-wing party, if we are a Tory retirement home, why is it that we beat Labour in Gorton and Denton on the 26th of February, a seat that they've held for more than 100 years? We were competitive with the Green Party. Of course, we lost the election, but it was not, it was pretty close. It was, 3,000-4,000 votes in it. Think of Caerphilly at the end of last year. Caerphilly, Keir Hardie country. This is deep. This is where the Labour movement really begins. We were at 1.7%, I think, in 2021, and in the by-election last year, we hit nearly 37%. 37%. This is these are swings that we have not witnessed in the history of British politics. Of course, the media narrative was Reform is all hot air. It fell at the last post, and Plaid won, and it was all tactical voting and so on. And people are missing what's happening. People who are supposed to understand, who are paid to understand what's going on, are simply have no idea what's coming. So it's not the politics of right and left, it's the politics of home, the politics of family, the politics of community, the politics of country. And we are all convinced that the 75% of our fellow citizens who believe that Britain is broken are right. Keir Starmer denies that. Britain is not broken, he says. Kemi Badenoch denies that. Britain is not broken. Everything's just fine. Well, we don't believe that. We think that the overwhelming majority of the British people are right. We believe that Britain is broken. We believe that it needs fixing. It needs reform. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jack and James. Fantastic. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I'm going to open it up for anyone who wants to ask a question on that microphone there. But my first question is that I've got 5 very good mates watching this on the live stream down south, scattered around the country. And they are right-leaning, brilliant people, very sociable, good public speakers, and very smart. They're exactly the sort of people that you want in Reform in 10, 15 years, running to be a candidate in a constituency, and they've completely lost hope in your movement. And they point to a few things, so the renationalisation of industries, so the state gets bigger, taxes go up or borrowing goes up, that disproportionately hits our generation quite hard. You mentioned about Conservatives, you've got quite a few Conservatives coming in, opportunistic, but you've also, Farage is saying that he wants, it's Green and Labour candidates wanting to defect. And is that really what Reform wants? Is it really what people in this country want to see as Green individuals going over to Reform who are left-leaning and shaping policy? And then most importantly is for these 5 people, this is not my opinion, I'm just saying these 5 people, is the treatment of Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib. Now we had Ben 2 months ago at a dinner, he came, and really I think he's a very good guy, and very great conviction, strong principles, and the treatment, and also the justification for what happened with them being released has caused upset with these 5. So my question really is how do you get these 5 people back in Reform, because you need them, because they might come to bite you representing a different party in 10, 15 years?
That was a long question. But so I think I can address the sort of Tory candidate stuff, and then I'll push to James for the policy questions. In terms of taking in too many Tories, first of all, let's talk about the Tories that we have brought in. We've got Suella Braverman, who resigned from the Home Office because she didn't agree with the direction of the Conservative Party in terms of their immigration policy. We have Robert Jenrick, who again did similar. and he has been on a sort of journey over the last couple of years. I've been critical of Robert Jermik. He was joking with me the other day that he's seen tweets that were not very nice that I've tweeted about him. But as a political movement, you will never agree with someone 100%. If you are joining Reform and you agree with the cohesive and core policy agreements and the message that we're taking to the country, and you have that experience in the Home Office, you have that experience in government, you have that experience in dealing with the civil service, then quite frankly, I think that you are welcome in our party, as long as you definitely stick to what the core message of our party and the USP of what Reform is all about, and that is a radical party that wants to smash the two parties and to rebuild Britain and to rebuild the British state. I guess you were also referring to other Tories like Nadeem Zahawi, for example. I know that that's a big concern for people. He is just a member. He is just a member. He has no formal position in the party. As for your other points in terms of, I can address Ben Habib. Ben Habib lost. In 2024, he didn't win his seat. He lost. It was not then reasonable for him to remain as deputy leader of Reform. He was told this, and quite frankly, he pulled a tantrum and left. That is what happened with Ben Habib. He has subsequently, for the past 2 years, launched a personal vendetta against Nigel and against the party. He is the prime example of someone who has put himself above the country. And that's my personal view on Ben Habib. As for Rupert Lowe, I don't think when you have 5 MPs with Reform, I don't think if you have 5 elected officials, you can't have one of them speak to the national press and say that the leader of your party is not suited to be Prime Minister, is not suited to be the leader, and then expect to be treated with respect. That is not a reasonable thing to ask of someone. That would be, for example, if you had a job and you started slating your employer publicly. Would you expect to keep your job?
No.
No, you wouldn't. So I personally think Nigel acted as well as he could have in that situation. Is it personal against Rupert? I don't believe it is. But that situation was untenable. And the conclusion of what happened with that, and again, you've seen, like Ben Habib, Rupert now is on a personal vendetta against Nigel. If you listen to his interviews, he's not interested in talking about policy. He's not interested in talking about the country. He's interested in talking about Nigel, and he's interested in talking about Reform. We are here today to talk about the country. We are here to talk about the issues that impact everyone in this room. And so what I would say to those 5 individuals that are watching at home is, if you have specific concerns and specific policies that you want to push forward, and if you want to have any type of influence in 10, 15 years' time, get on board.
Thank you, Jack. Yes, on the question of defections, I mean, we can't stop people joining Reform UK. I suppose we could. We could just say, no, we're throwing you out. We don't like you. But we can't stop ex-Tory MPs finding some turquoise wallpaper, getting their iPhone out, doing a video saying how Nigel Farage is the best thing since sliced bread, and they're now on board with Reform UK. That's then immediately announced as a defection, and then the story is, why is Reform going soft? Why is it turning into a Tory retirement home? Well, it's a lot of people who've been people have been worried about are simply fallen into that category. We have had some defections whereby we've been approached, or there have been defection conversations, and a role has been offered to a former Conservative. The first person to do that was my old friend Danny Kruger on September the 15th last year, and I was really part of that conversation with him over the course of 2 months, and I can tell you it was long. It was agonizing. It was a very, very difficult process for him. This is a person who's been basically reading Disraeli since he was in his cot. He was writing speeches for Cameron in 2005. He was political secretary to Boris Johnson, the number 10 Downing Street, got Brexit over the line with Dom Cummings. This is somebody who had really given the best part of his life to the Conservative Party. It was a very, very difficult decision. But in the end, he said, it's got to be country before party. The whole point of me going into politics and everything that I believed the Conservative Party could do was to restore our home, was to restore our nation, to restore the covenant that exists between the governing classes and the governed, and my party's done the opposite of it. And so it was not an easy decision for him at all, nor was it an easy decision for Robert Jenrick, who went through a similar sort of long night of the soul. He's been a Tory since he was 16, 17. He wanted to be leader of the party. He had a very clear vision for what the party needed to do. He was very honest, brutally honest about his own complicity and his own inaction in preventing the Boris wave. He did what he could, and he was very forceful at a time when it was politically costly for him to do so. And so I think we've actually attracted some of the very, very best and the most open-eyed and clear-eyed members of the Conservative Party, and it's a very, very, very small number. I think on the to your friends' concerns about, why are we also open to Labour and Green? Well, it goes back to my earlier point that we're not just another right-wing party. It's too simplistic to say that Reform is right-wing. It's too simplistic to say it's just another Conservative Party. We're not a Conservative Party. There's a lot of things we do not want to conserve anymore. A lot of things we want to allow to die or frankly get rid of. We need to reform a deformed body politic. We don't want to conserve a deformed body politic. And so the openness to Labour, I think, there's sort of a little bit less interest from Labour, but we are doing extremely well, as I said earlier, in historic Labour heartlands. We forced the Tories down in Gorton and Denton to lose their deposit. They only beat the loonies by about 200 votes. The first time they'd lost a deposit since 1983, the worst by-election they'd had in their long history. Conservative Party is over, and Reform is the primary cause and mechanism of that. But our openness to Labour is because we're a party that is focusing and talking about the working classes and trying to give expression to that sense of betrayal and anger felt by the working classes. That the C2DEs, those parts of our nation that have been most betrayed by the Labour Party, the very party that was supposed to represent the interests of the working classes, is the party that has most betrayed it, been most complicit in betraying it in so many ways. And as for the Greens, well, look, as I said to Nigel the other day, if you look at turquoise from a particular angle, it does look quite green. And in fact, as I said, we're a party that believes in concrete things, in place, in the land, in our history, in the accumulated heritage that is in our soil, is in our hedgerows, is in our cities, is in our hills and byways. And that means we're a party that cares about proper environmentalism, proper ecological concerns, all of those concerns that have been banished by climate apocalypse millenarians, people who have been insisting since 2005 that the world is going to become unlivable in the next 5 to 6 years. All of the focus has been, again, not on the environment, our actual built, lived environment of the land, but about meteorological questions, global questions around climate over which we have very, very little control. Even if we achieve net zero, that would reduce our global carbon emissions by around about 1%, a little bit less than 1%, roughly the increment of China's carbon emissions output annually. So to Labour and to Greens, there's a message. Reform has a message, and we don't want to dilute that message, and we don't want to sacrifice it on the altar of a kind of, hard, old-school Tory kind of Thatcherism. We want to be a party that's open to your friends, but also open to those members of the Labour Party that have felt themselves to be betrayed. We're a party of the working classes, not the elites. That's why we are naturally disposed, and we would welcome and warmly welcome former members of the Labour Party to join us, as indeed they seem to be doing in their hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Same with the Green Party. If you think of the way that campaign was fought in Gorton and Denton, did anybody hear anything from the Green Party candidates or anything from Zach Polanski about the environment? No, it wasn't about the environment. It was about, in fact, there wasn't much difference in many ways from the concerns that both Greens and Turquoise Green were expressing, namely its cost of living. We're facing an enormous challenge on cost of living. Reform understands that. The Green Party actually understands it too. Its solutions are unhinged, in my view, but they do understand. They've got their finger on the pulse of what it's like to be in your early 20s, trying to start out with rents going through the roof, the graduate premium being reduced to nothing, your student debt round your neck, just the price of a pint going through the roof, and so on and so forth. These are things that we are thinking about all the time as a party. It's something that I know that Robert Jenrick is thinking about all the time as he contemplates what economic solutions might lie ahead if we ever get into power. So, and then I think on the sort of internal feuding within Reform, and that was largely before I came on board, and I confess I wasn't really following all the twists and turns online. I think it largely is an online phenomenon. That doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. Sometimes Twitter really is the real world, or can certainly affect the real world. My own sense is actually one that I just believe that politics is an inherently agonistic process. I think it's good. I think it's a sign. The volatility that we're seeing on the British right at the moment is a good thing. It's like the Bitcoin bros like to say this. It's the volatility of Bitcoin that is a sign of its vitality, of its life. Things that are not volatile are dead. The British right is volatile at the moment because it's alive, because it's actually wrestling with questions that the left have simply forgotten how to talk about, won't talk about, but they just put heads in the sand. So I'm actually thrilled to see this sort of supernova, this sort of explosion of different perspectives and points of view on the right, some much more radical than us, some much less radical than us. In fact, I think it optically positions us somewhere around the middle. Actually, we're pretty close to the median voter on the North Stars, on cost of living, on immigration, on crime, on free speech, on culture and heritage. We're roughly speaking, not cynically tracking opinion polls, we keep an eye on them, but we're roughly where Nigel Farage has got his finger on the pulse of the British people, of where they're at on a particular issue, better than any other politician in living memory. That's just true. And he makes it look easy. I've noticed this. There's an effortlessness to his speeches, to his quick judgments under pressure, his ideas for what policy we should be thinking about next. And I think it's tempting for others to look who've also had very successful careers behind them, as I know Rupert and Ben have had, to say, well, I can do that too. And in fact, that transition from CEO to party leader is not as obvious as you might think. In fact, if you look across the history of Western politics in the last few decades, it's very hard to find many figures who've pulled that transition off successfully. In fact, I can only think of maybe Berlusconi and Trump. In the case of Berlusconi, actually he had to create an entirely new party around him, Forza Italia, in the 1990s. And in the case of Trump, okay, yes, you might say he sort of became leader of the Republican Party, but of course he didn't. I mean, he just effectively gutted it and restructured it around himself as a vehicle for the MAGA movement. So it is a very hard transition to pull off. And I think, it's tempting to look at all the interpersonal feuding and to think, I think when it started blowing up was around about this time last year, beginning of March, and everyone was saying, well, reform is over, Nigel is toast, we're going to join this party, we're going to join that movement, we're going to join this movement. And then on the 1st of May, reform secures one of the most substantial victories in local elections that we've ever seen a third party secure. Extraordinary results. Devastating to the Conservative Party, devastating to the Labour Party. That is to say, in those parts of the country where the government allowed us to have elections. And so I think it's easy to overstate the significance of the online feuding. I don't want to sort of dismiss their importance. I don't actually really know what went on. But it's easy to look at that and to sort of think and to forget that actually the British people might not be having better things to do with their time. And I suppose, I would simply sit back and I would invite your 5 friends to wait and see what happens on May the 7th. See what happens on May the 8th. Let's see if these other insurgent parties on the right can compete with us. And if they can compete with us, well, that's democracy. It's the agonistic character of democracy. It's why politics done properly is the antidote to violence. And speech is not violence, nor is hate speech. It's the antidote to violence. It's why events like this are so important. And so, so the more energy there is, the more debate there is, the better.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time slightly, so we're going to open up some questions. So if anyone's got any questions, Philip.
Hello. So I theorise that the left has very successfully moved the political spectrum to the left in the last 10 years because they focused on ridiculing the right, so the right and what they call the far right. Would it then not be good to learn from them and perhaps focus attention on the moral discrepancies within the Green Party rather than affording the decrepit Conservative Party more attention than it deserves? Thank you.
Well, I think you can do both. So currently the Conservative Party is at around 15 to 17%. We probably need another 8% of those people across the country to come and join and support and vote for reform if you're really to establish the majority that you need to fundamentally change the country. So I don't think we should hold back from the Conservative Party. As for the Greens, I actually think the strategy that should be used is that the Green Party should not be portrayed as this party of change, because actually everyone in this room wants change. 75% of the country want change. If you portray the Green Party as a party of change akin to reform, then you are going to lose out voters that potentially would vote for reform. How you convey the Green Party is that they are basically the establishment party on steroids. They want things to carry on getting worse. They want the country to carry on the downward slope. They want the decline to continue. And so the Green Party is a continuation of the British decline of the last couple of decades. They are not a party of change. They are a party that wants the destruction of the country, fundamentally.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is about who we should be opposing, or how. So we should be focusing more on the challenge that the Greens present than perhaps getting worried about the Tories. I'm inclined to say we shouldn't really be focusing too much on any of them. And in fact, although opposition and criticism and attack does have a place in politics, and it is important to call out and hold to account your political rivals and competitors, I think the bigger challenge for reform is setting out what we're for, is setting out a message of hope, that we are a party of hope, a party that wants to fulfill people's hopes, a party that wants to overcome and try to overcome the sense of betrayal and pain that people feel of years and years and years of betrayal by the ruling classes. And so we shouldn't just be talking about immigration. We should also be talking about cost of living. We should also be talking about what our plans are to restore our national security, for instance. We should be thinking very hard about what to do about crime, about our prison estates and hospitals and schools and so on. And we can do that I think in a hopeful way, because I think we have got a positive message. It's not a revolutionary or radical one in particular, but it is one around which we can feel a sense of hope. As I said, plenty of space within the kind of political fray to be attacking our rival parties, and I will say that we are extremely fortunate in our enemies on that front, but we shouldn't get too distracted by them.
Anyone else? Nick?
Thank you both for your talks. My question is about the kind of strategy and timing of policy, so it plays into what Jack said about patience in politics as well. So it's quite clear, I think, that on the policy areas that are not reform's natural home turf, like immigration, you're going to face a lot of pushback, a lot of vested interests and lobbyists, basically, when you're trying to sort of build a consensus for areas like, say, higher education. We're sat on a university campus here. It's clear that if you want to shrink the sector, which I think most realists would agree is what has to happen, then there's going to be a lot of pushback to that. So how do you foresee those kind of battles playing out in terms of the policy narrative? How do you see that in terms of having it maybe before the election, having the fight out in the open, or the sort of Ming Vase strategy where you leave it till after the election? So it plays into what both of you were talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Well, on higher education, I mean, I've been fighting against dominant vested interests, you might say, for the last 16 years by role as a university lecturer and professor. And I suppose coming from the university, or coming from quite an isolated place within one of our universities into politics, I don't really have any. I for one don't have any vested interest, nor am I particularly swayed by anybody who comes in pushing their vested interests. It's real. The phenomenon is real. My inbox is groaning with offers of help, of policy and personnel and advice and suggestions, and with a little coda at the end, could we come in and see you? And we look them up online, and it turns out they're connected to all sorts of big companies, and we don't automatically say no. What I do say no to is any external meetings, so I don't go off for fancy lunches in Mayfair with people who are obviously offering me something. It's all the meetings happen in HQ on our own terms. They're properly scheduled, just as would happen in the civil service. They're minuted. The people who attend, the time of the meeting is there. Everything is completely transparent. I'm ruthless at ensuring that policy conversations are siloed from funding conversations, for example. So there is a very, very strict separation within our policy-making process between policy discussions and any other discussions that might be happening across the party. They may happen, they can legally happen, but I'm not interested in them if they're bleeding into policy discussions. And the reason we don't say no to all of them, even the really obviously aggressive lobbyists, is because we can't send signals that we're simply deaf to and unreceptive to genuine expertise and experience that is built up in industries and sectors that we want to know about, we want to learn about, we want to understand what the problems are, and that means talking to people a lot. Sometimes talking to people who are not particularly that enlightening, sometimes people who are clearly motivated by vested interests. Sometimes those vested interests will actually be vested interests that happen to be convergent with our policy goals, right? So it's okay to I think of the organisation I'm a part of, the Free Speech Union. If the Free Speech Union writes to me and says, "Can we come and talk to you about free speech?" I'll say, "Cool, well, of course you can. We really want to hear your views." And he said, "Well, I've got these vested interests. We're sort of paid. Some of our donors really believe in free speech, and they've been giving us a lot of money." And I said, "Well, yes. Yes, of course, that's okay. That's fine. your donors' interests, your interests, and basically the party's interests are completely convergent and aligned on the fact that there is a free speech crisis in this country. It would be absurd for me to say, sorry, you're financed by this dodgy bloke who cares about free speech. I can't possibly talk to you because you're lobbying me. So I've only been in the job, 3 weeks now, and it is clearly, it's an art form. It's a delicate tightrope. There are certain protocols, strict protocols you can have in place that filter out the people who really you shouldn't be wasting your time on. But you don't want to say no to everybody, and you want to learn. You want to learn about what's going on from people on the ground who understand what's needed in the NHS, who understand what's needed in education and so on. And sometimes, they'll be passionately committed to their way of seeing what needs to be done. And so much so that they might have left lucrative jobs in the city to set up their own, education charity. And they'll be paying their mortgage, and they'll be, raising their families on an income from their their little think tank or from their charity. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's actually very interesting. I think it's a wonderful feature of the British political landscape that there is this actually very rich ecosystem, you might say, of think tanks, of single-issue charities, of academics who are very interested in issues and so on. And yes, sometimes those motivations will be a little bit muddy, but we shouldn't have that sort of guardian kind of paranoia mindset that it's anybody who's doing something for money must ipso facto be morally suspect.
Yes, that, yeah.
I'll take the lead from you.
Hello. I got way too excited for this and prepared several questions. So if James, you don't mind deciding between the questions, I'll give you the broad ideas of them. Economic policy. Your general, specific views on Aristotle, the wider right wing, and clarifying specific policy or ideology.
Sure. So, economic policy first. In fact, this might help also answer a hitherto unanswered question from your friends about, say, nationalisation and so on. I think it's true to say that the politics of the new right that is emerging all across the West at the moment is much less doctrinaire on questions of economic policy than it used to be, than it was, say, in the era of Reagan and Thatcher and Blair and Cameron, where there was basically a consensus that we should maximise free markets at all costs, we should have frictionless free trade at all costs, globalisation was an unalloyed good that would benefit everybody, and even if you didn't think it did, it was happening anyway, so just shut up and let it carry on. That is not the vision of the new right. The vision of the new right is economic policy must always be refracted through the prism of what is in the national interest, in the national preference. Does it benefit our home, or does it harm our home? Does it benefit the cosmopolis, or does it benefit the polis, to move into Aristotle? And sometimes that's going to mean contemplating policies that might give your 5 friends a rash. Nationalisation, for example. We don't make any steel anymore. We cannot defend ourselves. We have without steel sovereignty. We've got, why? Because weapons and you need steel. We can't just, if we find ourselves under invasion, ring up South Korea and say, could you triple the supply of steel to us next week? It doesn't work like that. So sometimes there will be a rational case for an industrial strategy. It doesn't mean just picking winners and losers. It doesn't mean we're suddenly turning to socialism. It means that we're acting ruthlessly in the interests of the British people and nobody else. We're not tied to any other part of the world, including the United States. We may have friends over there. We may admire them in different ways. We may have friends over in Europe, admire them in different ways. But the policy, it's got to be Palmerston. We have no eternal allies, only eternal interests. And that's true in foreign policy, and it's got to be true in economics as well. I will just add, though, we don't have the luxury of talking about, as the Breast Whisperer does, Zach Polanski, about, you know, does any sane person in the country think that our economic policy should be conducted on the basis that we're not being taxed enough? Does anybody in this country think that our economic policy, whatever it ought to be, should be formulated on the basis that we're not spending enough? And you know, in a way, the old debate between the Keynesians and the Hayekians was a debate that was possible in the twilight of liberalism, because we were rich enough to spend more. We were rich enough to be taxed more and not to mind so much. That's not the case anymore. It's certainly not the case for somebody your age. It's okay for those of us who are entering, you know, a little bit sort of further up the age ladder, but it is not, you know, this is not, you know, the politics of neoliberalism, the economics of neoliberalism are not, I think, where the young are at right now, and quite rightly, because they've been betrayed by years of it. And there needs to be a solution from a party that takes those concerns seriously. The Greens are trying to take them seriously, but with potentially catastrophic consequences for the very people they're seeking to help. We are taking it seriously, and we're developing carefully thought through, cautious economic policies that put fiscal prudence first before we turn to looking at how to relieve the heaviest tax burden since the Second World War.
So, yeah, just to clarify, so you are going to try and take substantial actions towards returning to, like, actual sound money and restore that into generational
Well, the question
justice.
of sound money, monetary policy, is slightly different, a little bit more complicated than fiscal policy. You know, the scandal that has been quantitative easing since the global financial crisis has meant that, you know, inflation is the worst tax of all. It's the stealthiest tax of all. No, I'm a great believer in sound money, and I'm a great skeptic in fiat currencies. I think the decoupling of currencies from gold by Nixon in 1971 has proved to be a catastrophe, and we're now looking for forms of sound money. And actually, I think Reform UK is the very first party in Britain to think seriously about what the government, what the state should be doing about digital assets. Should we have a sovereign Bitcoin treasury, for example? We'd be very open to that. Should we reduce taxes should we look at capital gains tax on crypto disposals, which my colleague Zia Yusuf has done and produced a brilliant paper on this late last year. Nigel himself is passionately committed to sound money, and has been watching and actually actively involved in the crypto space for a long time now. Now, questions around independence of the Bank of England and so on and so forth. I mean, Nigel, more than anybody, has held Andrew Bailey and the Bank of England to task. In fact, they had a pretty fiery meeting, I gather, I think it was it back in November, back in October, November, where he explained in no uncertain terms the failures that he felt that and the abuse that the Bank of England was responsible for in terms of, I think, certainly politicising monetary policy. I think there was evidence of that under Mark Carney. Frankly, irrelevant considerations coming into the deliberations of the Monetary Policy Committee. You know, it would always be possible to look at that mandate letter from the Chancellor to the Bank of England, considering whether or not it should be revised a little bit in some way or other, whether other constrictions should be attached to that. But yes, I think sound money is something that we're passionately committed to, and keeping an eye on inflation, trying to keep it lower. And one of the ways we keep it lower is by tackling these net zero policies, which have left us with some of the highest electricity and energy prices in the world. Simply scandalous. Of course, that disproportionately hurts those who can afford it least, particularly working classes. It's having an enormous impact on the cost of living. And so, yes, it's sound money is something we take very seriously.
Okay,
Thank you.
Very conscious of time. We'll do 2 more questions. So Anna and gentleman there.
Hello, thank you for coming. My question is, are you worried about the fact that the Conservatives are still present and they're still prominent in the polls, so whether that will affect the distribution and how reform is going to combat that? That's my question.
So I'm not worried. We just have to take into context the gargantuan task that we're trying to complete here, which is that we are trying to build and create an entirely new political consensus and smash the existing one that's existed for 100 plus years. In the Conservatives' case, hundreds. So we are trying to be a party that doesn't just replace the Conservative Party, but also replaces a core vote of the Labour Party as well. So, as I said to the gentleman earlier, the Conservatives are currently about 15 to 17%. Now, obviously, that's still too high. But we are trying to take people on a journey. You will not get people voting to smash a century-old system overnight. That's just not how people operate. It's not really how British people operate, really. You know, we're quite careful people, we're quite considered people. If you are telling a huge national population, the way that you have done politics for the last century is going to irrevocably change from this date, that's quite a lot for someone and a populace to take on board. So it's in stages. So the first stage was 2024 at the general election with the 5 MPs. Second stage was last year in May at the local elections, and we now have 900 plus councillors. The third stage will be this May, so in less than 60 days' time, May the 7th, you will see the Conservative Party, if James and I and all of our colleagues do our jobs right and we get the campaign right, which we will, you will see the Conservative Party reduced to a regional party. It will not be a national party. It will be dead in Wales, it will be dead in Scotland, and it will essentially be dead in England. And the reform will win hundreds, if not thousands, of council seats. And so that third step is crucial then to be able to say to that remaining 15, 17%, okay, we appreciate you stuck with the Conservative Party, you perhaps voted for them all of your life, they have failed you, they'd stand no chance at running the country in 2029 at the next election, come and join reform, come and get on board. And so these things happen in stages. So am I worried? No. Is it something we're thinking about and we're conscious of? Yes.
The Conservative and Unionist Party is the oldest and most successful election-winning machine in the history of politics, anywhere. It was a party before there were parties. It's been winning the very first elections ever held in early modern democracies. So what we're being asked here is, are we worried about the Tories? Are we, we haven't quite finished them off. What are you doing? Come on. You can't even do that. Well, we are doing that. We've done it in the space of basically 18 months to 2 years. This time last year, I think we were about level pegging with the Conservative Party. I think we started to pull ahead in February, March last year. And then on May the 1st, we saw a cataclysmic defeat of the Conservative Party, which I think, we saw immediately after that a 4-point spike in reform support, which we haven't really lost since then. We then surged in the summer after our Lawless Britain campaign over July, August and September. We softened a little bit that month, and then we seem to be creeping back up again. But we've been leading now for about 250 polls, and we've been certainly leading the Conservatives by a 10 to 12 to 15 point majority, and I suspect after May the 7th, when we witness the permanent erasure of the Conservative Party, as Jack said, in Wales, in Scotland, in vast swathes of Kent and of Essex and London, what will happen, I suspect, we'll get another bounce then. I think there's still 2, 3, 4 points in that Tory vote of Conservative voters who may be uneasy about voting for us, but are far more uneasy about the prospect of a Zach Polanski as Prime Minister, or even a Keir Starmer continuing as Prime Minister, or some sort of progressive rainbow alliance, God forbid. So my sense is, the direction of travel, just look at the direction of travel, recognise that what we've done in 2 years is effectively begun to introduce a sort of a terminal existential threat to a party that's been around for more than 200 years. I think we're doing pretty well.
Hello. Thank you for your contributions, the two of you. My question is for Jack. You began with some very good Farage apologia and anti-Chud rant, which that warmed my heart. Chud. The backdrop of that, not many people might know necessarily, but you've had to deal with some very annoying people in Restore Britain supporters, and I don't know what took you out of your slumber, because before you joined Farage's team, you were very active on Twitter, and you kind of took a lower profile. Last few weeks, you've started to post again. You're
not working hard enough, Jack.
No,
that's always been his problem.
No, you might have to work him harder, get him back into the cave that he was in. But I'm just kind of wondering, what is it about Restore Britain in particular which has unnerved you? What is it about the cartoon characters involved which has really kind of gotten under your skin? That's my question for you, Jack. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's not anything in particular. It's no individual. And I sort of, I tried to allude to it in my speech. What concerns me is that it is taking the energy and the vitality and the time and the attention and the effort of people who they quite frankly don't deserve. If you are 18, 19, 20, 21, if you're a young man or woman in this country, you are wasting your time if you would get involved with outfits like Restore, with Advance, with whatever other party that they eventually set up. You're wasting your time, but you're also damaging your own reputation. And so for me, that's something that I've always been very conscious of, which is that as a young person, you have fewer chances to prove yourself. You have fewer chances to show loyalty to people who, let's be honest, in politics have been around a long time. So if you are joining and supporting one of those parties, and when they inevitably fail, which they will, you're already seeing them fall apart because there's no cohesion, there's no real leadership, the teams that they've built aren't really cohesive, and actually have never won anything. Most of these people have never even stood for election. They've never won a single election. So the idea that they are, in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time, going to build an outfit that can rival, never mind Reform, but even the Green Party, or the Labour Party, or the Conservative Party, is quite frankly for the birds. So the reason why I've become more active is because I am concerned that it is taking young people in Britain and essentially taking them down a wrong path. And I would like to try and reverse that. So James is right. Maybe I haven't been working as hard. That's why I've been on X. But that is my goal in what I've been trying to do the last couple of weeks.
Just very quickly, I was saying to Jack on the train on the way up, if you look at, we like to look at the sort of top of opinion polls, but if you just look at the bottom category of the opinion polls, it's other. That's where we were actually about 2 years ago. And I still remember the fights about, why, we're clearly at 4%, we should not be another, But if you look at other, I think it was Salvation had other at 9, a 2-point jump on Monday. 9%. So we've got 2% Northern Ireland parties, 2% Plaid Cymru, 3 to 4% SNP. That leaves 1 to 2% covering Restore Britain, Advance UK, the UKIP, what's left of it, it still exists, the Sharia independence, the other loonies, the actual loonies. Now, okay, who knows where these, it's all other, but it's 1 to 2% contains that basket of what are for now electorally fringe, statistically fringe parties. Doesn't mean that one of them might not break through. British politics has never been more volatile. Voters, quite understandably, have never been more fickle in their loyalty, in their party political loyalties. So you might see anything can happen, but it's not as easy as it looks to go from other to government in waiting in the space of about 2 years.
Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Jack and James, for coming up to Newcastle, the two. And thank you all for coming on this really wet day. So yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Afterwards, we may go to a pub. I'm not going to say where. It's on the live stream in case we get those comments. So yes, I will keep up quiet for the time being, and we'll head off somewhere. But thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you all. Thank you.